Want to lower your risk of MS symptoms and relapse? Take vitamin D, a lot of it. That's basically the message to the MS community for years. So we've stocked up on our supplements and took them daily. But now recent research suggests that this may not be true. 2 studies concluded that high doses of vitamin D did not significantly reduce MS disease activity. But before you toss your vitamin D bottles, let's dig a little deeper into the details. Just as a reminder, this discussion is for informational purposes only. It is not medical advice. Please continue to work with your doctor for all your medical needs. If you're looking to jumpstart your healing with smoothies that are both delicious and healing, join my 5-day smoothie challenge at alenebrennan.com/smoothies. You'll receive recipes, shopping lists, and smoothie demos, and so much more. Check it out at alenebrennan.com/smoothies. Now, on to the news. There are 1 million people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the U.S., so that makes you 1 in a million. And you have a special purpose in this world that no diagnosis can take away from you. So if you are ready to reclaim your body, mind, and life from multiple sclerosis, welcome to my MS podcast. I'm your host, Alene Brennan. I don't know about you, but I've always viewed vitamin D as the easiest and, quite honestly, the cheapest strategy to manage MS. It can't stand alone as treatment for us, but it was a little extra layer of protection. And it was something that conventional and functional medicine agreed upon, which is no small feat. They said things like low vitamin D levels were associated with higher rates of relapse, more severe disability, more brain atrophy, and higher rates of many chronic health problems, whereas higher levels of vitamin D were associated with higher levels of function. And really, this wasn't just with the MS community. Low levels of vitamin D were associated with higher risks of autoimmune disease across the board, and even mental health, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Those are some pretty substantial reasons to take this small supplement that's relatively inexpensive. One important message that has always come along with this, and I personally have shared with this community many times, is to have your personal vitamin D levels monitored by your doctor. I try to aim personally to have mine tested about twice a year. This helps me best understand exactly how much I need to be supplementing. When I was first diagnosed with MS, my vitamin D levels were in the gutter. My level was 11. That is insanely low. So with my doctor's recommendation, I took high doses of vitamin D, and now I average around 50, which is really good. The quote unquote average for vitamin D is often said to be between 30 and 70, but many functional medicine practitioners feel being in the upper end of this or even a bit higher is optimal. It's important to get your specific levels tested though, because vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, which means that your body doesn't have the ability to just flush out excess levels if it gets too high. Water soluble vitamins like vitamin C and the B vitamins just flush out through your urine if you have too much, but a fat soluble vitamin is stored in the body. So that's why it's important to go to your doctor and get tested to know your specific levels and then therefore how much you need to be supplementing with. Now, I never heard or met somebody who had too high vitamin D levels, but it's just the smart thing to do. So get your levels tested, and that way you know exactly how much to supplement with. Okay, I wanted to set the stage for us about vitamin D, but now let's dive into these studies. What did they say and what does it mean for us? There were actually 2 studies done, one in the US and one in Australia, New Zealand. The US study, conducted at Johns Hopkins University, explored the difference between high dose and low dose vitamin D in individuals with relapsing remitting MS. Relapsing remitting MS is the most common form of MS. It's what I was diagnosed with, and I know many of you were diagnosed with as well. So we have relapses or flares, times when we experience symptoms that last for days, weeks, or even months, but it's followed by a remission, times when those symptoms go away. So Johns Hopkins University was trying to determine the difference between high versus low doses of vitamin D with individuals with relapsing remitting. After 96 weeks and 140 participants, high-dose vitamin D supplements did not show any tangible reduction in MS activity. And that includes both relapses and MRI-detected brain lesions. I unfortunately didn't find a whole lot of details beyond that, but I'm really curious to know the doses that were used and what was the baseline level of vitamin D for the average participant. I'm also curious to know, where do these participants live? Did they live in sunny environments or did they live in an overcast area? Personally, I'm not quick to dismiss the value of vitamin D based on this study alone. Now let's hop over to the Australia-New Zealand study. This trial was to determine if any dose of vitamin D could delay the onset of MS in people diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome, or CIS. Now, if you're not familiar with CIS, think of it as like a first warning sign or the preliminary stage of MS. It's basically a neurological quote unquote episode, which may involve symptoms like numbness, tingling, visual disturbances, weakness, a variety of symptoms, but symptoms that last for at least 24 hours. You may or may not have detectable lesions on an MRI, but you're typically monitored by a neurologist to see if you have any more episodes. If you don't have another episode, it's just classified as CIS, essentially a one-time occurrence. If you do experience additional episodes over time, it could lead to a diagnosis of MS. So this study was trying to see if any dose of vitamin D could delay the onset of MS in people diagnosed with clinically isolated syndrome. The result? After 48 weeks, there were no significant difference in the number of participants who went on to develop MS, regardless of the vitamin D doses they received. Again, super disappointing. I always viewed vitamin D as the low-hanging fruit to managing MS. It's such a small supplement and it's so inexpensive. It's easy. But again, before we stop taking vitamin D altogether, we have to recognize that these studies don't answer everything. The participants didn't have severe vitamin D deficiencies at the beginning. So we're left wondering, would someone with a significant deficiency benefit differently from vitamin D supplements? Maybe. As I said earlier, when I was diagnosed with MS, my vitamin D level was at 11. That's crazy low. But again, now it's 50. And I can definitely say that I not only feel better, but MS is obviously more stable now too. Now, can I say that that's directly related to vitamin D levels? No. A lot of other things changed during that time as well. However, I know that I spent a tremendous amount of time indoors, so I get very little exposure to the sun to make vitamin D naturally. And especially now that we're going into winter, it's important to remember that vitamin D levels can also affect our mood, specifically seasonal affective disorder. When you feel more sad in the winter because you're spending so much time inside and not getting any sunshine. And I've actually been part of conversations on research that's happening right now to see if the key factor for us is to get vitamin D from sun versus supplements. Because we know there are lower levels of MS in areas that are closer to the equator. The further you get away from the equator, the higher the rates of MS. Crazy, right? In areas near the equator, MS occurs in fewer than 1 out of 100,000 people. In areas farther from the equator, such as Northern Europe and Northern North America, MS occurs in around 30 to 80 people out of 100,000 people. That's a significant difference because what happens around the equator, you get more exposure to the sun. So the initial thought was that it was connected to vitamin D, and a supplement would be just as effective as the vitamin D that our body makes from the sun. But what if there was more to the sun than just vitamin D? It's the same concept as trying to extract one nutrient from a food and saying that you'll get all the same benefits from eating broccoli by just taking this supplement. We know that's not true because food is dynamic, it's synergistic. It offers multiple nutrients that work together to provide your body with maximum benefits. Turns out the sun might be the same. We can't just take a supplement and call it a day. We do actually have to spend time in the sunshine. Now, as someone who has heat intolerance, I'm right there with all of you who are saying, that's great, but how can we get sunshine without suffering the effects of heat? Well, my friend, like everything with MS and health in general, it is a balance. Personally, I try to go outside in short increments, and I obviously don't go out on the ultra hot days. Another thing I find helpful is being out with the water. So being able to be in an ocean or a pool allows me to get exposure to the sun, but the water is helping to cool my body down. And lastly, I try to be really intentional about being out on the cooler days when I know I'll be more comfortable. Okay, so let's bring this full circle here. These two new studies suggest that vitamin D might not be the holy grail of supplements like we were originally told. But it doesn't mean that we completely discredit the supplement or the natural source of vitamin D. Hello, sunshine. Personally, I'm going to continue to check my vitamin D levels with my doctor and based on the results, supplement accordingly. Okay, my friends, this wraps today's episode of MS in the News. Well, my friend, we've reached the end of this episode. Pick one lesson from today's discussion and put it into action now. It's time to reclaim your body, mind, and life from multiple sclerosis. And for more resources, events, and programs, head over to alenebrennan.com. See you on the next episode of my MS podcast.